This is Ganesh. I'm Uday. And Ganesh, we were talking about leadership, and we were kind of talking about leadership that is inspiring and leadership that is coercive, manipulative. And we talked some time back about how inspiring leadership gets natural followership. And you are a person who has completed a undergraduate course in psychology, and I just wanted to ask you if there is a process by which people can actually learn to be inspiring to others. So let's talk about that today, and go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, this whole thing started when about 4 or 5 days ago, Appa came home and he put this question to me during lunch, and it was totally out of the blue. And he asked me, is there a process to being an inspiring person, or an inspiring leader? And it seemed so random, but it was so gripping, because even in a psychology class, you don't talk about inspiration. It seemed such an intangible thing. And I thought it really posed an interesting problem. How do you quantify it? How do you qualify it? Or how do you operationally define it? I think, Appa, when we stopped talking about it last time, we were talking about 3 kinds of inspiring people. I remember you talked about Sachin, you talked about someone like Rajnikant or Amitabh Bachchan, and I think the third type was
someone who's a leader in the industry. So there are 3 clear types of leaders, right? One, does not come into physical contact with people, who's an actor like Rajnikant, right? And he gets a huge fan followership, right? Even though people don't get to see his real self, right? A superstar gets to inspire, right? The other category is a player like Sachin. People get to see him in action, in his leadership action, right? And people try to follow this leader, aspiring cricketers. They try to learn his style. So that's natural followership. So we're talking about natural followership. And the third type of a leader is an ordinary, by ordinary I by no means want to reduce the importance of the work that they do, is a leader who works in an enterprise, who comes into contact day in and day out with people, and has that physical touch as part of his leadership delivery. So 3 types of people. One, who never comes into contact with people but gets followership. The second, who's the cricket player, who comes into contact, also, a lot of people see him in media, people get to see him, people get to interact with him, as a person, physical self. And all the time there is a leader, the third kind, who is in touch with people, right? 3 environment, 3 contexts.
I also add a 4th person to that. We did touch upon it the last time we speak, and this kind of leader is ubiquitous in societies around the world today, and that's the leader who motivates using fear. And this can happen on many levels. It can be that really bossy manager who manages to get the job done but ends up alienating everyone in the process. And at the high extremes of the spectrum is the despot, or the military general who's leading a nation into the ground. One thing that strikes me almost immediately is that the third kind of leader, the kind of leader that you want working in an enterprise, working with a time deadline, working with very specific skills and with very specific responsibilities, it's an entirely different ballgame from many of the other 3. Someone like Rajnikant, the Tendulkar, they're there. The aura around these people kind of inspires a kind of stirring in you, a kind of longing in you, and It speaks to that which is within you that wants to aspire to the same things. But when it comes to being an inspiring person in the context of an organization like HCL or Infosys or whatever, it's not so much about the star power, but it's about getting people to deliver results. Very simply put, there is an instrumental quality to it.
So, what you're saying is right.
Yeah.
But I want to add that, in all these cases, we are talking about automatic followership.
Mm-hmm.
So you talked about a fourth kind of a leader. The fourth kind of a leader is, controlling people. Always chooses the command and control mode. I think a lot of people very quickly are able to copy that from others, right? And authority yields to command and control. The moment you move up in an organization and have a position of authority, and you are able to control the lives of people through instruments that the enterprise gives you, then manipulation becomes easy,
Yeah.
and it can be copied very quickly, right,
Yeah.
from others, right? It's not very difficult.
No, it's not.
Whereas automatic followership, right? So what is it that is common between a Sachin Tendulkar or a Rajinikanth or a very inspiring leader in an enterprise who people in the enterprise want to emulate without that person, him or her, trying to make people to emulate? People say, oh, okay, I'm very inspired by that person. I want to learn what he does and I want to be like him when I grow up and become a leader. Right? So there is a clear distinction that we talked about. Type 1 where we are talking about people wanting to follow on their own, and that requires trust to be built. That requires inspiration to be created by the leader, charisma, aura, all that we can talk about. So, is there a process to that is what we are going to talk about.
Yeah, that certainly gets to the core of the issue. You're talking about, what is this thing that's there, this intangible thing that all of these people possess, whether you want to call it charisma or an aura or whatever it is. What is it that, draws people to them? And I think that you can quantify that. I mean, how I go about it as somebody who's interested in psychology is, a very simple way to do it would be to start with the people who we know are inspiring and design a study, go to the employees of HCL or Infosys and get about 200, 250 people who are working under leaders, and to each person, ask a simple question. Nominate one person in the circle of people you interact with every day who is inspiring you. And it's anonymous, obviously, as these things should be. And you'll get 250 responses. See if there are names that pop up very often. And, make a list of names and, write down how many votes they got. And then pick these individuals, and make them the subject of the study. And in the study, you can have many variables. I would certainly, as a psychologist, I'd study, among other things, I'd study emotional stability, the ability to hold one's own when you're being buffeted by emotional pressure from all sides, whether it's a refractory employee, a difficult employee, or whether it's a high-pressure work situation. When they go and get stuff, what do these people do? I'd devise a questionnaire to study that.
So you're saying a person should actually be able to lead oneself, right?
Yeah.
To be inspiring.
Exactly.
Right? That's one of the things that we are talking about. That irrespective of the pressure that is around that person, which is probably what we can relate to with Sachin. He may be in a very tight situation with respect to winning a game or setting a target to others, and a lot of responsibility can come onto his shoulder. So even under that pressure, Sachin Tendulkar as a batsman, Sachin Tendulkar as a captain, how does he work with the rest of the team, right? What are his responses to the stimulus that he gets continuously.
Mm-hmm.
Or similarly, let's say, I don't know about Rajinikanth. Rajinikanth, it's a tinsel image of Rajinikanth that comes on the screen. So I don't know whether we can apply this, so we leave that for the moment. So, I can relate to Sachin. And similarly, you are saying a leader in the enterprise should be having a lot of self-mastery and self-leadership to be an inspiring person. Interesting. What else?
I think that you mentioned Sachin. I personally feel that MSD, Mahendra Singh Dhoni, in more recent times is the better example. Because if you actually think about it, MSD is not really known for his technique, and he started with a blistering 183 against Sri Lanka, and he's known for his wicket-keeping skills. But what he's really known for is his captaincy. That if you look at media reports on him, if you look at what he's received praise for, it's not so much his cricketing skills, but it's because he's one of the best captains. There are people who disagree. He's one of the coolest minds we've had at the helm of the Indian cricket team in a very long time. And it certainly does stand out in a leader. And coming back to the study, the next thing that I would look for is the ability of a person to empathize.
Right. That is to sit in the shoes of the other person.
Exactly.
All the time.
Yeah.
Right? And listen to the person as the person would have felt or, would have thought about what is to be conveyed. That's empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We were talking about that last time. I gave two very specific examples.
Right.
We discussed this idea that inspiration is not so much about standing back. That's part of it. Standing back, doing your own thing properly, and inspiring other people through example.
Right.
But in an organization like HCL, you yourself made the point. It's not always about the I'm an example, follow me kind of leadership. It's also about interaction. When you're a leader, you need to be extremely sensitive to who's the weakest chain in the link and who's the best performer, and how do you get this person from where he is to a place where you want him to be. And if you remember last time, I was talking about how it's not a very good idea. An ineffective leader is one that motivates through criticism, and criticism alone. When you empathize with a person, even if they are not performing as well as you would want them to be, even if they aren't doing as well as you know them to be capable of, you don't go and tell them, you're not performing up to par, you're not there, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. That's not effective. An empathetic person, before making that split-second judgment about another person's actions, takes that extra step, recognizes that that's a different person over there. And
so what is in human psychology that relates to this, what we are talking? What is it that we are leveraging from human psychology in leadership to empathize?
Well, empathy has a neurobiological component. Empathy, we're social primates. I think it's a fact, though it's a very contentious issue, the fact that we've evolved. I think in this country, most people accept that, but where I've lived the last 4 years in the US, evolution is still, the jury's out on evolution, it's that kind of thing. But I think we're social primates, and I was telling you about the recent book by Steven Pinker, the Harvard professor, in which it's called The Better Angels of Our Nature. And he talks about just as we have our violent instincts, we also have another side to us, which allows us to model other people's emotions and see where they're coming from, all instinctively. You don't even have to reason it out. Your empathy is what acts up when you, in a very exaggerated way, when you look at someone and cry. Look at a movie and feel the tears flow. It's what you see when you smile at the baby and the baby instinctively smiles back. It's just all those empathy centers firing. So empathy does have a biological component. And you can also learn to be empathetic. I certainly know that from my own life experiences. As we grow older, grow from adolescence to adulthood, you start to see that the world doesn't revolve so much around you, and that other people are distinct beings, and You know,
Right.
you learn to get rid of self-bias on many levels, on a personal level, on a cultural level. When you go and travel to another country, you get rid of ethnocentrism and you move towards cultural relativism. That is something that is an extremely important trait, I think, in someone who's inspired. For one very important reason. In another book that I'm going through right now for my research, it's Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind. He used to be a professor at the University of Virginia. He studies moral psychology. The thesis of his book is that unconscious processes guide most of our decision making. That is to say, I mean, the metaphor he uses is this metaphor of the elephant and the rider. The elephant in the picture is your unconscious brain, all the processes that are unbeknownst to you. They're acting under the radar, and they're making, even as you survey the world around you, they're making split-second decisions. Do I like that? Do I not like that? And your moral reasoning is just what he calls a post hoc rationalization. You actually, by the time you've reasoned out why you like something, you've actually made a decision whether you like somebody or not. That has enormous implications for interpersonal relations. I mean, for example, take the finding from social psychology that attractive people are more likely to be perceived as intelligent, and a number of other things, a number of other positive traits. So what's really happening there is when you see an attractive person, a physically attractive person, you get a surge of positive affect, which endears that person to you. And then, because your brain has already moved towards that decision, it's changed the mode in which your brain works. So in fact, you'll actually, if that person makes mistakes, you'll justify their wrongs, and you'll try to point out the positive aspects of that person's character. And that might be a force that's acting there. Now, how does that relate to an empathetic leader? Well, when somebody is able to put himself in another person's shoes, I mean, the very conversations he's going to have with that person are very different. I mean, it's not going to be a confrontational, argumentative style, but this guy is going to be a good listener, and this guy is going to mirror the other person's emotions, maybe use some humor to diffuse any tension that's between them. And on a visceral level, an instinctive level, the other person tends to like you. And when somebody likes you, when you've tamed the elephant, as maybe Jonathan Haidt would say, the rider, or the reasoning process, which serves the elephant, will actually work in the leader's favor. When you like a leader on a very raw level, then you're more likely to be able to, you're more likely to want to please that person. You're more likely to be receptive to that person's criticisms.
Right.
Yeah.
So what we are, I'm getting a nice, insight from this discussion.
Yeah.
Right. The insight that I'm getting is that empathy that you use in every interaction. Probably an inspiring leader will attempt to create shared beliefs, right?
Okay.
And operate on those shared beliefs, right? When that person is leading. So, empathy is you understand the strengths and weaknesses and the environment around each person. You understand the beliefs of each person, and you actually push an agenda through by conditioning shared beliefs, not manipulating your belief onto them. But on a continuous basis, when you work with a team, you actually work with each and every team member, understand their beliefs, don't go to the least common denominator of all those beliefs, but
Yes.
have a way of negotiating in an inspiring way to reach a common understanding or a belief of what is the right thing to do, right? Which actually takes care of the interests of the enterprise, which is basically the stakeholders of the enterprise, which is the investors, which are the
Yeah.
customers,
Yeah.
right? And then bring in a shared belief, and then tries to operate. So this negotiating, is there an art, or is that an art, or is that a science? What does psychology say about the process of negotiating?
Well, it can certainly become a science, and that's what people like me are obsessed with. But it is an art for those people who are inspired. You know, it comes naturally to them. They obviously don't think of it as a science. You know, when something comes to you like that, it's more of an art. It's something that you have and it's something that you can build upon. I'll ask you a question in return. When you say belief, you use that word a lot. Can you give a specific example from your experience? When you say belief, it can mean a lot of things. From the way you're saying it, it looks like this is a belief about how a process should get done, rather than, you know, religious belief or a cultural belief.
Yeah, so let's say that somebody sets a target. Very,
Okay.
very simple case. A customer comes back and says, I want this project done in so much time. And the leader is going to commit, saying, yes, Mr. Customer, I can deliver this project in so much time. For instance, in cricket, let's say that the leader wants to set a target in a one-day cricket match and say we have to score 300 minimum, right? And we're going to play first. Is that a shared belief? There are a lot of perceptions from each player about how well they are feeling today and what is their capacity to strike on that particular ground, on that particular pitch based on their past experience, their perceptions on the strength of the opposition or the competition, right? So every belief combines together and there is something called a shared belief that is hanging out there, right? And the leader actually, through empathy, through a process of negotiation, should actually find the maximal point in that shared belief and then pick it up. Not everybody will be at 300. If you want to set a score of 300, somebody will say, I'm sorry, I don't think so. We may only do 195, that's the maximum. How do you get that person to believe 300 without stretching that person? And how do you bring down the person who says we will do 375 today? That's the belief that I'm talking about. Shared belief.
Well,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. The person who says 195 is obviously lazy. And the person who says 375
But an
is
empathetic
deluded.
leader does not say that, right?
No, he doesn't say it out loud, probably. But I think that on the other hand, and this gets to the other point, a leader cannot afford to be too empathetic. I mean, you can't make it an absolutely democratic process. Sometimes you have to overrule, and that's why you're there. I mean, it is a hierarchy of dominance, and there is a chain of command.
That's where the negotiating process helps,
Exactly.
is my thinking, and therefore I'm going to psychology
Mhm.
to see what does psychology say, or what do we have to learn on the process of negotiating. So suppose I'm negotiating with you on something, what kind of mental state does it put you in, put me in? You know, are we both stressed about the negotiation? So I thought that will be a very interesting exploration.
Well, I think that as a leader, you do have to provide direction to the team. And like I said, you need to be able to, and this captures this negotiation idea very well, you need to be able to sweep the room and take into account all the different viewpoints that are there, but you need to reconcile that with the goal you set for the team. You can't, it's pretty common knowledge that if somebody wavers too much based on public opinion, then that person is not perceived as a strong person, and that seriously vitiates their perceived status as an inspiring person. But I'll take the particular example that you gave me. It's extremely simple. I mean, when you're a leader of a cricket team, the captain of a cricket team, if you have one person saying 375 and the other person saying 195, you obviously know a lot already about these two people's characters.
Right.
Already, you've probably worked them before. But even if it's your first day as captain, one very simple way of showing what's rational is, take a look at the pitch. What's doable on this pitch? I mean, there's probably going to be a 40 run, how would I say that? And it's going to be like, we can get between 260 and 300 guys. 195 is selling yourself too short, and 375, while I'd love to do that, is going for too much. Certainly, let's aim for this. and then we'll try to go for 375, but I'm sorry, 195 is just not acceptable. So,
Right. So the leader applies, to some extent the negotiation process can be your own gut, that you want to tell people. And the level of inspiration that you've already built on them, the amount of leadership brand that you have that you're leveraging. But one important point that I got from what you said was, it's very important to understand, we talked about, being a self-leader, we talked about, empathy, listening to people with empathy, we talked about creating a shared belief, but you also said that a leader would have understood every one of his or her team member.
Yeah.
Right? So that is a very important step,
Exactly.
actually. Spending time with people and understanding them, right, is another very key element, that comes in inspiring leadership. So let's switch the track and then go to failures. Sachin or Dhoni doesn't win a game all the time.
No.
Right? So they fail as leaders. They set a target, they don't reach the target as a team. So is there something there that an inspiring leader would do differently than a person who takes control? For instance,
Well,
okay.
that is obviously, that's probably one of the biggest things that you face when you talk to leaders and try to educate them. In my own personal experience, I've found that, I've gravitated towards people, and, I find that people are more welcoming of me when, one particular strategy is employed. I mean, when you've lost a game or when you've lost a company, I don't think there is much point in, pointing fingers and, playing the blame game. It's about, if you look at how Dhoni does it, that's fine. We lost the game, we lose games sometimes. Set standards for the next one. Don't lower the standards for the next game. Of course you want to win. Look at, this is pretty obvious for somebody like you. Look at the positives from what we've done, but also look at the reality that we need to concentrate on all these things and just keep moving there.
And learn from the mistakes, right?
Exactly.
You should be able to analyze with your team. So to the external world, you go and accept defeat. And, should the leader go in and then say, it's because of me that things failed, the team is fine? Or, should the leader say, collectively we failed? Obviously, the leader should not blame the team. That's not very inspiring. Saying, I'm good, everybody else is not good.
No.
It's not a good thing to do. But at the same time, should the leader say, all the blame is on me? What does psychology say? Or should the leader, collectively put the team together and say, we as a team are learning, and we as a team want to do better next time, right? And also compromise the strengths of the competition when the strengths are exhibited by the competition. Also, acknowledge the strengths of the competition. So, which one is the right thing to do in this?
I think it depends on the situation. It depends on the kind of failure. If you know as a leader, for example, success is not always an option. Success is always the goal, but success is not always an option because of external factors. What has really helped me in my own personal life, and I got this from conversations with you and friends and from my own reading and an understanding of psychology, is that we often set goals for ourselves that are hopelessly unrepresentative of reality, of what is realistic. And we have ideas about ourselves that are the same, hopelessly unrelated to reality. And when reality actually doesn't match up to that, gives you, a good kick in the groin. We're disillusioned. Sometimes when a team is, on an avalanche, really, on a trot, and doing well, and suddenly something goes wrong, and the leader knows that everybody's put in their best, then of course there's absolutely no point in playing the blame game and saying that I did something wrong, or you did something wrong. It's just like, I'm proud of you guys. You did your best. I'm really proud of you. But you can't, on the other hand, you can't afford to walk on eggshells when somebody has really screwed up and cost the team. You do have to point that out and make that clear. I mean, and there's a certain way of doing it. It's not giving them the hair dryer treatment. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't.
The hair dryer treatment is where you pick someone in front of everybody else and then give them a total, 15 minutes of absolute screaming.
Okay.
It's what a lot of football managers do at halftime. They just pick the player who hasn't been playing well and stand 3 feet away from them and just let it at them. Well, that just shows that, I mean, a football game or, a chef's kitchen, that's an extremely different environment. I don't think there's any need for that in an enterprise like HCL. So you need to calibrate your response to the situation. And this idea of calibrating one's response is also a skill that we talk about. There is, I mean, you don't really talk about the 10 commandments of leadership, or as much as we talk about it, and even though a lot is being written about it, I don't think you can really distill all the wisdom there is about leadership.
Right.
You can absorb all of it, but I think somebody who's going to be really effective is a person who's aware of what's going on and what's applicable in that situation. I mean, there is no, recipe for getting things right each time. A leader is also supposed to make mistakes. A leader is not, doesn't have everything figured out.
So are we saying that there must be kind of a value system that goes around self-control, that goes around honesty, that goes around empathy, that goes around shared beliefs and working on shared beliefs, and goes around acknowledging strengths of others and learning from failures.
Okay.
Right? So that's a value system that's around an inspiring leader. And the level to which you can apply tactics, and the point that I'm getting is sometimes a leader may have to be coercive, may have to be a hard negotiator, may have to exercise force, and the threshold that the leader, he or she, goes to is situational. And a good leader does not overdo things, right? That's what we are saying, that there is no recipe, but there is a shared value system, there is an inspiring value system that the leader can adopt. And the leader has to learn by practice on how to apply the tactics, how to change the strengths of the tactics, on a situational basis.
I would say in response to
Sure.
in response to that, I'd say that, mirroring Richard Dawkins, there is a recipe for being a leader, but there is no blueprint for being a leader. I say it's from Richard Dawkins because he uses that to describe how genes make the body. The genetic code is basically a recipe for how the body should be constructed, but it's not a blueprint. It doesn't say, it's not a map.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it doesn't say this should go exactly here and this should go exactly here.
Right.
In a recipe, you have a number of ingredients, but you can, for example, with the same ingredients that you use to make an omelette, you can make another kind of egg dish, right? So it's kind of like that. And all these things that we talked about, empathy, the ability to assert oneself, being aware of oneself, creating psychological profiles of the people you work with, understanding the relationships between them, all these things play a role. They're all ingredients in the recipe that makes a good leader. But a leader needs to prepare a new dish each time. No two situations are the same. And that's certainly, a skill that people have to inculcate if they are to be. Because I've made the mistake many times. I've assumed that there is sure shot way to get something. You know, that if I follow this dictum, this maxim, that's going to happen. But there's never a one-to-one relationship. You know, you're more likely to be an effective person if you're aware of what's going on right there, and then you connect that with the best response that you have, and then you try to make something happen. And ultimately, you also acknowledge that I've done my best, and then I'll probably get a result, but if I don't, there's always going to be another situation where I can do this as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. It has been a good discussion, Ganesh.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.